Hi and welcome everyone. I'm Suzanne Kelly with the Cipher Brief here with our COO Brad Christian. It's very nice to have you with us this afternoon for part 3 in our 6-part series on artificial intelligence in the new age of national security. Today we're talking about artificial intelligence and the military's new battle rhythm. We're looking forward to welcoming the director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center in just a few minutes, Lieutenant General Michael Groen, and AI Commissioner and former Undersecretary of State for Acquisition, try to say that 3 times, Katharina McFarland, who we're proud to say is also a Cipher Brief expert. But before we get to them, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this important series of conversations, Microsoft Federal. Robert Shelton is Microsoft's Chief Technical Officer and Advisor for Microsoft's National Intelligence Division. Robert, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Suzanne, and appreciate the opportunity.
I thought we'd just talk shop for a quick minute. I want to thank you again and thank Microsoft Federal for sponsoring these important conversations, because a lot of times they don't happen. A lot of times they don't happen without sponsorship support like that, so thank you. But I'm also wondering, on the issue specifically of AI, what's top of mind for you from the private sector perspective when we think about AI and national security?
Thank you. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Is that okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. From a timing perspective, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence just released a report last week that talked about where America was and the investments that the U.S. government needs to make in order to keep America in front of our adversaries, and in this case, China. I work predominantly in the intelligence community, where both on the national and the defense side, and I want to say that artificial intelligence has quickly become the #1 topic that the government wants to hear about. And the number one issue is around the competition, and I do believe that America has the ability and the mindset to be #1 in this area because of basically our culture and our approach to solving hard problems. I also spend a great amount of my time looking at what our commercial customers, think the big box stores, and what our U.S. government is doing. And I'm curious because it looks like the big box stores and the websites actually are the #1 artificial intelligence creators and users in the world, and governments are #2. And I always try to draw correlations between what I'm seeing at the local big box store and what I see in the government. And it's and I bring that up because you can go to a store, and I won't name any brand in particular, and they know more about you getting out of your car before you get into the store than any foreign or local government would. They know things about your physical build, sometimes your health, sometimes your financial position, the things that are trigger you to buy something or not to buy something, to be loyal to them or not to be loyal to them. They know all of that before you even hit the sliding doors and walk into the building. And if I think about that, that is analogous to some of the things that we see in scenarios in government. They also use AI for tracking, their versions of bulletin beans and human resources and how to hire the right people and who to promote. They're using it in a holistic way. And so when I read the report, I'm thinking America and China have a lot to learn from, name your big box store. So the good news is that all of those stores are U.S. Conglomerates, so we can get a lot from them. The other important thing that I think about is the fact that we have so many sensors and so much data that the government, including the Department of Defense, can learn so much and apply artificial intelligence in ways that, along with our ability to be creative as a society, that will not only help us in a defensive and or offensive way, but it also will be helpful in improving the day-to-day life of the soldier and the contractors that are working with those soldiers. And so I'm happy that you guys are having this conversation today, and I can't wait to go on mute here and sit back and listen to the commissioner and the general.
Thank you so much, Robert. We appreciate you being here. We look forward to engaging with you in the questions and answer section too. I think, the private sector perspective is something we really focus on and take seriously, because I think there's not a person on this call who doesn't understand that it takes both working together to provide a solid and leading national security and defense. So thank you so much. It's nice to hear your thoughts on this, and we look forward to hearing from you again, hopefully in the Q&A session. All right, some quick logistics for you before I formally introduce our guest today. We have a number of former senior national security leaders on the call today. I'd like to personally welcome you and thank you for taking part in this conversation. We also have a number of journalists with us on the call. Today's briefing is on the record. You can submit your questions for our speakers using the link on the webinar page if you're joining us via your computer. Mine's a little box that's set up on the right-hand side of my screen. There's a question option there. Please feel free to send questions in at any time. It's always good to get them early to make sure that yours is asked. If we have any redundant questions, we kind of weed those out so that we save the time of our guests. So don't be disappointed if yours doesn't get asked, but another one similar to it was. If you're calling in on your phone, you can also send your questions via email to Brad. Sometimes it's a little easier. He's at bchristian@thecipherbrief.com. All right, let's get into it. The National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence has issued its final report, as Robert mentioned, presenting its overall strategy for winning in the artificial intelligence era. You've probably already seen it or read outtakes from the report, but in case you haven't, you can download it from nscai.gov. I realize this sounds a little nerdy, but it makes for fascinating reading. The report includes 16 chapters on how the broader US government needs to be thinking about AI for future national security, and they've issued blueprints for action. We're focusing today on AI and the Department of Defense, and with that, let me welcome the Director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center at the Department of Defense, Lieutenant General Michael Groen, and AI Commissioner and former Undersecretary of State for Acquisition, Katharina McFarland. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this important issue with us today.
Yeah, hi, Suzanne. Thank you very much for having us. Really glad to talk about a subject that I know we're both very passionate about. Thank you.
Yeah.
Same here. Ditto.
We're going to have a great conversation today. So I'd like to kind of kick it off. I think most of the people on this call and most of the people in the Cipher Brief community have a fair bit of knowledge about the basic topic of AI. But General Groen, if you don't mind just kicking off for us, let's talk about JAIC and what you're doing there, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. Obviously, it was stood up to help the military take a more focused approach at AI, the fact that there is no avoiding this and that we need to stay on top of it from a military perspective in order to be successful. Just talk to us for a couple of minutes about the center and about what you're focused on there right now.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Suzanne. So the JAIC, if you don't know what a JAIC is, there's no reason you would, but the JAIC is the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center for the Department of Defense. There are many think tanks in Washington and the Washington area. We are a do tank. We are not a think tank. We are an implementation organization. So what we really focus on is the transformation of the department through the adoption and integration of AI across all of the department functions. And so when you think about that, a lot of folks, go straight to warfighting, and that's a natural thing, and it's a good thing. But when you think about, the Department of Defense and the potential for AI integration across the department, we think about all of the warfighting functions, of course, but then the massive support enterprises, the 20 defense agencies, the Defense Logistics Agency, the Defense Health Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and so on down the line. Each one of those has massive data challenges. They're sitting on piles of data. Some of them are already doing really good AI work to work through that data, but some of them are really just getting started in their AI journey. And then in addition to those two, the warfighting and the support enterprises, there's the business process transformation, right? So we want to make sure that the Department of Defense learns how to operate and act as efficiently and effectively as any modern enterprise does. And today that's lacking, as Robert indicated earlier. You know, you can go to a big box store or shop online or try to get a vehicle to take you from point A to point B, review a movie. I mean, you know, all of the AI applications that we all experience daily. The Department of Defense doesn't benefit from that, right? Like, we have not integrated even the simplest AI technologies at scale across the Department of Defense. So we're really excited about this opportunity now to take, you know, capability that's extant somewhere else, take that technology, match it up with functional problem sets or functional use cases in the department, and turn technology into capability for the department. And so we're really excited about that mission. We've got great partnerships, and it's growing like crazy. We can talk more about this in implementation, but we're really excited about how do we get the transformation to occur faster? How do we accelerate it? How do we move it on? And when you think about, you know, the Department of Defense, about 3 million people, about $700 billion a year, you know, in budgetary authority. Holy cow, if there's one place that we as Americans want AI to be effective, there's one place that we want to be efficient and effective, it's the Department of Defense. And that's our mission, right? Transformation, to drive that. We are an accelerator for AI implementation across the department.
And I'm looking forward to hearing about some successes and challenges as we get into this conversation. But let me bring in Katharina McFarland, because you have spent the last couple of years of your life focused on AI as one of the commissioners for the AI Commission that had just kind of sent its report to Congress. I love the fact that you spent enough time figuring this out, that you're one of the world's leading experts on where the government is on this, but also that you came up with some blueprints specifically regarding DoD, which is your background. You were the Undersecretary of State for Acquisition. You've held a number of different positions within the Pentagon. So talk to us a little bit about how the commission framed up the challenges that DoD is facing and some of the recommendations that you're making to give General Groen even more of what he needs to reach that level of efficiency that he's working toward.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. So what you're talking about and what the General raised for issues were essentially a component of the work that the commission did. In 2019, when Congress established the National Defense Authorization Act that stood up the commission, it chartered the commission to advance the development of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and associated technologies by the United States to comprehensively address the national security and defense needs of the United States. That's actually the excerpt right out of it, right quoted. And the first thing that we did was take a look and understand what was the playing field of AI, and we broke it into two parts. One is considered artificial narrow intelligence, which is the state of the art. It's not, it's task specific. It doesn't generalize. And then, of course, the second area is general intelligence, which is learned in one domain and could be transferred to another, kind of like human learning. And that is really leading edge research that's going on, and we don't expect that in the near term. That's coming about. So the Department of Defense, like the General said, is just getting ready in terms of adoption and is using narrow intelligence. And that's important as a framework, because the assessment that we did that took the first year of our work was to understand at all levels what was going on in the global environment and where was the United States position. And now I'm going to drop down into our national defense area. What were we doing in the national defense to be able to be prepared? And so we had very broad support from Congress, and very grateful for it. They took adapting in our second year when we started handing in early recommendations, because we recognized we needed to get moving on this because we were behind and needed to keep our position globally. We felt very driven to provide these recommendations, and Congress adopted them, and about 75% of them are already in legislation. The community of this commission was bipartisan. We had 15 people. They were technologists, national security professionals like myself, business executives, academic leaders, and we were appointed by Congress, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Congress. So you had a really strong, I believe, group of people. Everyone learned from everyone. I have to say, I felt a little sometimes like, where's Waldo? Because some of the intellect at this table is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very amazingly supported by the intelligence community, by the Department of Defense. No holds bar. We were given access to information like you really needed to have to do a good commission. And all of our findings were consensus. That means that it's the total group of people at the end of 1 year were baselined to understand the state of play, and the second year worked on determining what the recommendations, and as you called the blueprint, were, and agreed to them. And the really two consensus judgments that came out of there in big picture, if you read it, it's a heavy lift. There's about 143 pages of recommendations, followed by an additional several hundred of actual language for implementation. And we're writing an implementation plan for the government. But the first recommendation, or the consensus judgment, was that the government is not organized or resourced to win this technology competition against a committed competitor, and not ready to defend against AI-enabled threats. And that's an important thing, because our culture is a certain type of culture. We believe in privacy, we believe in ethics and morals that are very distinct, and not necessarily so in our adversaries. And we have a very distinct risk profile, and I can get that into questions, and Strickland the general, because he understands the international law of war, and we comply to that. And so we have to be ready to take on folks who don't have that approach. And the second consensus opinion was that the nation must be AI ready by, I'm not kidding, 2025, in order for it to defend and compete in the upcoming era of AI accelerated competition and conflict. This is, very important. So our final report you mentioned, it was broken into two parts. One was titled Defending the America in the AI Area, and the second part was Winning the Technology Competition. I look at it through a little lens. The first 8 chapters of a 16-chapter report were getting us ready, getting us tooled up and ready, resourced. When resource includes talent, includes money for R&D, includes money for the folks like the JAIC and folks who are accelerators. And the second part is getting us enabled, taking research, getting it into the mature stages for application, having people understand as a nation that AI is ubiquitous, it's here to stay, and we as a nation can do it right. And we in like-minded countries can get aligned and do it right. And so we see mainly 4 pillars for action. First is leadership. And thankfully, we've been consumed and have consumed a lot of congressional and other people like the good general's time to get to the point where everybody understands essentially where we need to be and how we need to approach. The second is talent, people, 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 and then people again. And this is broader than your simple, let's get them understanding AI. We're talking putting in some real heavy lifts like schools and accreditation methods and pathways, so that the military, civilian, and commercial world can all raise up to be able to adapt in all levels of education. And access is included in that, so that we can get the talent we need in this nation. And third is hardware. We're needing to make jumps in this, and we in the West of the world right now are too dependent on manufacturing in the areas like Taiwan for semiconductors. So we have a whole bunch of recommendations that relate to that, right? And then the fourth is innovation. We as a nation, and we're naturally going to look across all areas of innovation globally, but we as a nation really have historically led and continue, we believe, to lead in innovation, and we need to double down on that. And really, for the safety of our nation and for the world to be prepared and then act in appropriate ways for the use of our artificial intelligence, that's a must-do. So those are the 4 main areas. And then horizontal themes I already alluded to: coalitions, partnerships with like-minded nations, but a focus on responsible use of AI, ethical, taking a look at all the application science that we already embrace in terms of our values, morals, and ethics, and how do we apply them. And there are ways to do this. We don't need to have fear. We just have to get down, knuckle down, and really push for the technology space that allows us to adapt and utilize AI appropriately, safely, and ethically, et cetera.
Right.
So I'm going to leave it there and let you bring aboard folks to have us engaged. The General and I are both, as you can tell, very passionate about this. I'm so pleased that the JAIC was able to continue, and we were able to have Congress support the establishment of the JAIC as a 3-star general with operational experience, particularly me, who grew up in the Marine Corps. I love the fact there's a Marine in charge. And then there's all the folks that are there beside him inside the department to establish a top-down leadership for implementation and acceleration.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm the daughter of a Marine, so we can have a little love fest on that later, but I'm sitting
All right.
across from a former Army Ranger, so we'll have to deconflict a few issues. You know, a couple of people who led that commission, which I just wanted to mention, were Eric Schmidt and Bob Work, and I think most people already know that. But I've heard both of you say, when describing kind of the status of where we are right now as a nation and as a DoD, we're not super organized or resourced against this. We're not where we need to be. And 2025 is 4 years off. And you've both mentioned that there are adversaries that don't have the same issues with privacy and regards to respect to our constitutional rights that we have in this country. These are going to be some pretty significant hurdles to overcome, I would think. General Groen, let me ask you first of all, and you can be blunt here, the report that was put together by the commission, are things like this helpful when the military is implementing sort of a plan or thinking of a plan to move forward, and then helpful in implementing it? And how it seems like this is not a political issue. This is something that, regardless of who's in the White House, the US does not have a lot of room to get this wrong. Are we right on that? And how can we get over some of those efficiency and readiness hurdles that we have today?
Yeah. Okay. Great, Suzanne. I mean, so there's first of all, yes, absolutely, and we've worked with the commission very closely over the last year and a half or so to help make sure that we've got a common understanding of kind of where some of the deep problems are. One of our most significant challenges is this idea. There is an idea in the department that AI is some future thing, right? AI is our future. You hear that a lot, and every time I hear that, I want to just shout out loud again. Hey, if we want AI to be our future, it has to be our AI present, right? Like, I mean, we have to start building these things now. And so that whole, the challenge to implementation across the department is not necessarily technical. We have a lot of technical challenges to overcome, but those are all pretty straightforward, quite frankly. Our real challenge is an appreciation for, an imagination for, how do you apply AI in your functional area? Because it's not, we cannot have a black box environment where, somebody, the JAIC or somebody else, delivers a black box and sets it on somebody's desk and says, hey, congratulations, now this little box is going to make your decisions for you. That's now, it can't work that way, and it doesn't work that way. So part of the real challenge is to get decision makers, process owners, leaders across the department and all of the agencies and all of the services to think through, okay, what are my processes today? How could those processes be better affected if I use data, right? Or more data, or the right data? Am I satisfied with making decisions without good data? We have to have leaders who are impatient for AI implementation across the department. And so that's what we're actually trying to coax that, right? So, we want to kind of spread this fire, this demand signal, so that more and more people want to sign up to the transformation. And so this has been kind of our challenge. It's Imagineering, right? Is how do we get people to think, process owners to think about AI implementation? And when they think about it, then we can start talking about methodologies. And a couple of the things that are clear, and I think the report really gets after some of these things. They say, amateurs study tactics and, professionals study logistics. I would say in this space, amateurs study applications and professionals study architecture and process. Because we have lots of shiny objects emerging across the department. There are leaders across the department who are going out, finding an AI company. Every company's an AI company these days, and and building small AIs in lots of different areas. And that's all really good. 1,000 flowers blooming is great, but at some point we have to kind of coalesce this into a garden, right? We actually need to be purposeful and build purposeful enterprises. And so the functional underpinnings, or the architectural underpinnings of AI capabilities across the department, are the kind of things that the JAIC is really concerned with and really concerned about, because we want to make sure that all of these efforts coalesce, without stomping on the flowers. How do we coalesce this into enterprise of capabilities? You've heard of JADC2, I'm sure, as this construct for sort of all domain command and control, any sensor informing any platform or any decision maker, all really good. But we're not going to buy a JADC2, right? We have to evolve a JADC2. And so, like, getting the department to think differently about how do we make decisions, and then how do we want to bring in automation to a degree, or artificial intelligence writ large, to help us drive those decisions. It's really one of the things that's really important to understand is this idea of a tech inversion. If you understand the culture of the Department of Defense, historically, the Department of Defense would research and develop and build new technologies and new capabilities, and sometimes those technologies would sneak out into the commercial environment and be built up by the commercial environment. Well, today we have much the same bureaucracy in the department, right? The big program approach to capability development. But instead of the Department of Defense developing cutting-edge research and development, the commercial industry has already paved the way for us in this place. So we have this tech inversion, right? So the challenge now is to take existing tech and bring it into the department processes. And unsurprisingly, the machine doesn't really work in reverse really well, right? The machine is built to come up with a requirement, have a large defense contractor build a system or an architecture or something and deliver it, instead of a software engineering approach of building a little, testing a little, expanding a little, trying it again, bringing in another service, integrating this function and that function. So the JAIC is really pushing kind of this bottom-up, test and develop, continued maturation of a capability, much more akin to a software engineering model than sort of the standard process of old, where you have large-scale acquisition programs that deliver finished products. And so that cultural shift is a really difficult thing to accomplish. We're getting there. People are understanding more and more every day, but it takes time to turn this big defense ship.
100%, I can understand what you're saying, particularly when you do understand sort of the culture of the military. You talk about building, testing, and then expanding, which is sort of a very different approach than the world had to the internet, for example, very different. And we talked early on in this series in our first session with Dr. Jason Matheny at Georgetown, who spends a lot of time on this issue as well, who reiterated how important it is to get kind of the framework right and the thinking right around AI. Katharina, let me ask you, when the commission was going through coming up with something that could actually be used and be a guiding tool for the US government when it comes to understanding AI, how much time did you put into thinking about how difficult it would be to kind of break down these cultural barriers? You talked about everything that's needed: leadership, talent, hardware, innovation, education, but none of these are easy when you're dealing with humans who I'm sure General Groen is tasked with getting through to the importance and how they should be thinking about it. How did the commission approach that?
Well, each of the areas in the government are different in their culture. And of course, ours in the Department of Defense is based on a very thorough and based on reasons in the past, testing, validation, rigorous checks and balances are in place. But they were predominantly based on systems like building a ship or building a weapon system. AI is an enabler. It's inherently different. It's a thread that passes through all of the other systems that we have, improves outcomes, can basically expand opportunity space, but what is its strength, speed, is inherently a problem inside of the department because it's not built towards that. It's built on a risk averseness that is deeply ingrained, and I can give you ample reasons why, and I wouldn't want to avoid risk, I want to mitigate it. So the big challenge was, how in the department do you mitigate that risk? What are the tools available, and what tools are not available for the department to adopt and adapt really quickly AI? And so you'll see a huge section inside of the report talking about test evaluation, validation, verification, for simply the validation and verification for artificial intelligence, which we aren't adequately providing for our military or our civilian world in the federal space.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal to have that investment. And designating a leader for it is also a cultural thing. The whole military is based on a pyramid, and it goes top down, but it does go bottom up. So we put in place a tri-chair committee where the undersecretary, et cetera, are going to be on to top-down leadership to drive into a committee of practice with all the appropriate members from each of the services and agencies to take a look inside of the system. And bottoms up, we've asked for AI examine in looking at all of our operational exercises and training. We're looking to embed AI opportunity space. And so, and then one more level, I mean, I can give you several because you're right, this is a cultural thing, but one other thing that we ask for the department to do, which they embraced, is the National Defense Strategy talks about our problem sets that we need to adapt. Well, we want a classified annex that talks to the technology to meet it. Right? And we tied our intelligence community with the Department of Defense on this level of artificial intelligence as well, because nothing is more energizing than to understand the threat and what it can do to you and how AI could help. So at all levels, from the combatant commanders to the documents that are the guiding principles, to training our military and civilians, to providing for a committee that focuses in on this, we went and put ample resourcing and guidance, and again, negotiated it in advance with the department and Congress so that when it came out, it was already ready and prepared for. So yes, we spent a bit of time on this, just candidly.
A little bit of time thinking that through. I've been really selfish with all the questions because I could literally talk to you both about this all day, but let me get to a couple of the questions from some of the great folks that we have who have called in. Sherry Reed has a question for General Groen. She says, what technical challenges do you see as the DoD implements AI across multiple domains? You talked a little bit about some of them. Do you want to go a little deeper on that issue?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, so the technical challenges, I think, one, we have to have an appreciation for the scope of the problem set across the department. And so, when we talk about like warfighting stuff, the warfighting problem sets are the most important, clearly, but it's the environment where the data is like least available and the processes are least defined. We have good communities of practice. They know how to do their craft, whether that's artillery or aviators or intel people, I mean, you name it. They know their systems, they know their processes, but they don't necessarily know the tech. We have people in the JAIC and elsewhere in the department who really know the tech. I mean, the tech is becoming prolific, especially in narrow AI kind of stuff that Katharina talked about. So what the real magic is how do you bring functional expertise and the technical expertise together to start solving problems? And so this is, again, it goes back to this imagination problem, right? The functional experts need to have the imagination to say, you know what, I'm not satisfied with the quality of my decisions today. I want some of this AI stuff, and I don't want a black box. I want to sit down and think through the way I do my processes with somebody who can help me then apply technology. So this sort of communication, I call this implementation, is so critical. And I love all of our partners across the research and development enterprise. And there's a big focus in the report about, hey, let's double down, I mean, literally, on research and development activities. But we have to have an equal level of attention to real implementation, right? Because until we get process owners who understand that AI is not tomorrow's technology, it's today's technology, and your processes can benefit from this. We're going to be lagging, right? So again, it's a cultural shift, it's an education thing, it's a technological thing, and it's a functional thing. So, you know, one of the challenges of this business in the Department of Defense is you need to be able to think across all of those different domains, if you will, not to mention the warfighting domains, and bring all this stuff together, right, and help people see this. And so that's we spend a lot of time in the JAIC just talking through with folks. Another thing that I alluded to earlier, I just have to mention this, is this idea of an enterprise. And so the department famously and purposefully by design, the Department of Defense is oriented around services and service developments. I love the services, especially the Marine Corps, but I love them all, right? And so, but each one, you know, is conditioned to build its own thing. We do our own thing, we'll build our own architecture, we'll buy our own weapon systems. And then, you know, we've tried to, you know, Goldwater and Nichols tried to start to steer that into a joint integration. And so we do have great joint warfighting integration when we talk about warfighting concepts, and we have combatant commands all over the world. But we still, there's this culture of individual service developments. And so we have to get, we have to mature beyond that into this idea of an enterprise of capabilities across services and across departments and across agencies. And so, and we're making good headway. Honestly, there is fantastic folks in every service working on this problem. And almost all of them, you know, when we call them and say, hey, we ought to talk about an enterprise rather than individual capabilities, almost all of them, we get an enthusiastic response like, oh yes, I've been waiting for you to call. Now let's figure about how do we stitch together a fabric of capability instead of just a set of, you know, individual points of light all over the place. And so I think that culture is shifting, and you know, you kind of have that first wave of people sort of enamored with the technology. I'm hoping to get to a place where we're enamored with the enterprise and the integrated warfighting capability that represents. We're not there yet, but that's okay. We're, you know, this is still a new thing, and we're going to keep pushing. The things like the NSCAI report do is serve as a catalyst to get people's attention on this target. And once their attention's on the target, then it's kind of up to us to kind of steer them in the right direction. So it's very exciting. Lots of great work to be done.
Keeping that front and center, I would think is going to be one of your missions. We do have a question about the warfighter kind of scenario in the future. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But first, I have a question for Katharina from Alan Mabouche, who says 2025 was mentioned as the nation being AI ready. What does that look like exactly? And what metrics are being used to know if we've accomplished that goal? I love that process question. It's important.
So exactly, and it's a very thoughtful question. The way that the commission approached it is that we said by 2025, the department needed to be ready, and ready encompasses things like having established inside of the organizations a representative who looks to ensure that the privacy and the ethics and morals are in place, and that there's a vetting process where needed in different federal places. It turns out the Department of Defense already has a fairly good one. We're just going to leverage that. It needs that there should be by this year AI readiness performance goals set and to drive those outcomes and to achieve more substantial AI integration into the department. It involves getting tools that test and validate, and software designs that protect against dual use technologies going the wrong way. And let me give you an example. Facial recognition is an AI tool, and in certain places like the medical arena, it's incredibly important and has produced and saved lives like crazy, right? But if you use it wrongly, as we have seen, and frankly, I'll just pin one of the things that we were concerned about is the privacy issues that Hanwei's 5G brings into play because of the data collection that, like the general mentioned, that we as people who protect and preserve our own freedoms, including privacy, don't align with. Those type of technology spaces you can protect against. You can write code on code that protects the transfer inappropriately of what you build to another location for maligned use. AI ready means that we've got those in place, that we understand how to build, that industry and the government understand how to evaluate and have metrics to show our stepwise progress towards what we want to be. So that when we get into the more advanced technologies where people have really got to understand and frame it appropriately, we've got all the infrastructure built. So things like logistics, sustainment, business enterprise systems, things that have to do with maneuver, have operational exercises and training already have that embedded in it. So that when we start bringing in even heavier and more, we call it more complex systems like general intelligence and other aspects of what we're seeing in the future, it comes to bear. Let me give you one last snapshot of this. People automatically align artificial intelligence with computers. Artificial intelligence operates in all domains: chemical, biological, material science, energetics, you name it. All of those engineering sciences have application of artificial intelligence in it. Because what it is it's a human taking a task and having it performed elsewhere. So we'll always have humans involved. And that's a part that we have had a lot of misinformation, and we believe perhaps even offshore information operations, and we discussed this in the report, from offshore entities to try to slow us down from the use of AI so that they can keep going and beat us out on this competition. So yes, ready and enabled.
Yeah. So I think you just hit on a lot of the questions that Matthew Sullivan had written in about. So Matthew, thanks for the question. I think we already got to most of them for you, but I appreciate you sending that in. So let's talk for just a minute about China. There's a great question here from Briggs Spearman, who says, my question is, are we looking at AI systems as a target? So as we're so in our rush to develop AI to be able to be competitive with other countries, how vulnerable do we anticipate these systems will be to deception and denial? Clearly, that's something that's we're thinking about as we're creating these systems. With electronic warfare, as an example, could we see development of counter AI and then counter AI systems? This is what war is all about, right? General, why don't you take that question first?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, the simple answer is yes. Obviously, AI security, and not just the AI of the security of algorithms, but the security of our processes, the security of our data. You know, the challenge is, you know, we want to have the ability to share training data, for example, you know, across multiple departments. So if somebody has a great, you know, algorithm, you know, that might work in a different use case or different application. No, we want the ability to share that base algorithm. We want the ability to share the training data. We want the ability to bring new training data, maybe a different type, you know, to some of the same algorithms. So like we're trying to build this like data-friendly environment and a sharing environment across the department. Well, when you're doing that, sounds really great. But what keeps me up at night is, okay, how do you secure this, right? So how do you actually secure the environment to make this sort of widely sharing capability real and possible? And so we spend a lot of time right now working specifically on AI security, especially for our foundational infrastructure and our platforms. But there's the other aspect of you know, for the People's Liberation Army, for example, you know, they get their AI basically, you know, very strong entrepreneurial sector in China, of course, but the Chinese Communist Party is able to kind of just peel off the AI that they're interested in, flow it through state-owned enterprises, you know, and right into the PLA with no accountability, no transparency. You know, we really don't know what's under the hood, and that makes that very dangerous, right? So we don't know what's there, and so you know, we try to keep our eyes on what kind of development's going on. But the other thing, I think our strength is derived from this ethical baseline, right? This trusted ecosystem. For us, trust is everything. And you know, for me, it starts, you know, all the way down with like the established ethical principles that the department has established, but moving beyond, you know, just sort of stating ethical principles, integrating those principles into real AI development through test and evaluation or validation or verification, so that no kidding, we have trusted AI, you know, leaving the foundry, that's leaving a secure foundry and is available now in a protected way, and then adopted by by commanders who trust it, right? Who know that it's built on sound AI ethical principles and responsible AI development principles, thoroughly test, evaluation, validation, verification, and then working, you know, so that level of trust inside our own defense, U.S. defense ecosystem. but then expanding that. So the ethical baselines that we've established for the US and published have been adopted by 12 other nations have joined with us in something we call the AI Partnership for Defense. So we have 13 like-minded nations, and honestly, people are knocking on the door. Other nations want to join this. We're working through that now. 13 like-minded nations who said, you know what, we want to build trusted AI ecosystems on an ethical foundation, consistent with the law of armed conflict, consistent with our moral responsibilities, and consistent with something, you know, we talk about legal imperatives and moral imperatives. I also talk about comparatives, right? So the comparative is, okay, if I don't do this with AI, I'm going to have to do it with a human being. And when you're talking about military effects, we put young men and women in very dirty, dangerous situations where their lives are at risk every day. And you have to look at yourself and say, okay, do we have a moral imperative to change that dynamic, right? You know, collateral damage, for example, collateral damage estimation is an important part of our targeting process to make sure we minimize human casualties and collateral damage. We have AI algorithms that can do that as good or better than humans in some circumstances. Is the moral imperative then to bring AI into that decision process rather than a human who makes mistakes? And so these are the kind of moral dilemmas and ethical dilemmas that we will, you know, we purposefully and transparently work our way through with our partners, international partners, to make sure that we have a strong, protected, secure, and responsible AI ecosystem and enterprise.
We have a
Can I
question.
add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Sorry. I think it's important from a technical view to understand that as we write code, we can protect the code we write. And taking and ensuring that provenance and authenticity is part of the data set, that's why we have to really focus initially on the building up of our ability to manage data, which is the foundation of decisions, right? Algorithms process or execute information. So provenance and authenticity, and then having infrastructure and algorithms that cannot be thwarted because they have the ability to protect themselves, is what the general is talking about. From an industrial view, that's what people do. And we already have that in many of our weapon systems. People don't realize that we've been using forms of artificial intelligence for systems that we operate today that have been completely tested and validated and have protective systems around them to prevent intrusion, misalignment of data, inappropriate use of the data. So we have some, maybe not all of the systems at the level that we have, but we base that on risk. And again, risk is supposed to be mitigated and managed, not feared.
Yeah, and we have some best case scenarios, it sounds like, that we can kind of work from. We had a question here from Ignacio Cortines, who is from NATO's Rapid Deployable Corps in Spain. Thank you for staying up late and joining us for this. But I think General Groen answered fundamentally his question, which is, do you think that it's possible to implement AI within NATO as well? It sounds like there are a lot of other countries, maybe even some outside of NATO, that are signing up for working with us based on what you just said. So let me pose this question. There are a few folks who have written in who are very curious about how this is going to impact the future of the workforce within the Pentagon. How are we going to see jobs changing? What are the new skill sets that are going to be required to make sure that the U.S. is keeping up with where it needs to be and is hopefully leading the way in its use of AI? And General Groen, you want to go first, and then Katharina, I'd love for you to answer that question as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll start out, but I'm going to start off with the general American competitiveness theme, right? Which is, if AI is going to be a $16 trillion enterprise, you know, or a market in, you know, the maybe 2030-ish, a date that corresponds with Chinese, the Chinese Communist Party has indicated they want to be dominant in AI by 2030, and they're trying to accelerate a lot of that into 2025. So there's this massive, you know, economic engine that's just waiting to be built and waiting to be employed. So in the Department of Defense, you know, we're looking at this challenge. I mean, there's an incredible amount of work to be done in expanding the ethical baselines, expanding our relationships, you know, NATO and other countries. And then specifically with respect to our ability to transform enterprises inside the department. This broad transformation is absolutely key. And I think, you know, I kind of missed on the last question. I just want to make sure I reinforce. We have great broad relationships with the academic community, because I think the U.S. academic community is another fantastic resource that is in our hands. So between the academic community, the business community, and especially in the artificial intelligence domain, we've got those relationships established that help us survive this capability, counter capability cycle, by keeping us appraised of where the research and development is and where the modernization of the enterprise or of the technology sphere is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pick up from what the general said, and I've already mentioned that in the report, and I really recommend people take at least and read the summary. We talk in a lot and have several areas in the report focused on education, training, advancement, and I'm going to bring to the table my own personal experience working in the department. We've had horrific cutbacks in civilian population that support the military over the last 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And the work hasn't gone away. In fact, it's increased. I've never found a day that I didn't feel like when I left there after doing 10, sometimes 12-hour days, that I left areas open because I just couldn't cover it all.
Mm-hmm.
My belief is, personally, having seen a lot of this and being an engineer myself, I think that this is an area that AI can contribute greatly to improving the outcomes of our federal workforce, because it can take tasks that are intensive labor, collection of information, interpretation of information, and repetitively doing multiple drills for even just a budget area. This can lessen the load, and you can focus your mind on analytics.
Mm-hmm.
So the Department of Defense and a lot of the federal workspace, this will be a huge help to that community that's really struggling to try to keep up with all of the things that come through. In the commercial world and in our growing up of our people inside of our communities, et cetera, the transition is already happening. Is the adoption and the mental aspect or approach to the use of AI has been growing faster than the Department of Defense and the federal government has adapted to it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't presume that there aren't things that are going to be changed in the workforce from this, but I also offer that there's plenty of venues for helping retool them. And in fact, some of those stronger recommendations that we have in our report are related to funding and changing and supporting this transition. And we're talking about accreditation and certification, as well as full, bachelors of science and stuff. And now they're look at how we plan and manage and educate our workforce.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, just in one of our recommendations that's been adopted, we're recommending $8 billion annually for R&D inside of AI. I believe that there's plenty of venues for people to put this into work and make it not just profitable for the national defense or national security enterprise, but for themselves. It's a competitive landscape that's not going away. It's kind of the adoption of electricity. It's fast, it's moving, it's energizing, it's opportunistic. In other words, there's places that you can find places to bring things to bear that you can realize great improvements in your work and life. So I believe there's ways to do this right.
It's actually thrilling if you think about the possibilities given the R&D focus within DoD, with DARPA, with IARPA, with the national labs, with the private sector, and what they already know about us, which we heard from Robert Shelton right off the top. I think bringing all of those together and funding them and giving them what they need in order to do a lot of this R&D is probably one of the things that's going to set the U.S. ahead, if we can coordinate all that, which is no small task. But I understand, I cannot believe we've been talking for almost an hour, because I can literally go on all day about this. There's so much we didn't cover. But I do want to recommend that everybody really download that report and at least read the executive summary. Pour yourself a glass of wine, a shot of tequila, whatever you need. But it's worth taking a minute to kind of relax and take it all in, because there's a lot there. And getting the right understanding of all this is what's going to move us ahead as well. There's also a really interesting piece that the Cipher Brief did this week from someone within the intelligence community on how they're thinking about AI, called The Robot, the Targeter, and the Future of National Security. So if you haven't read that, I recommend you go to our website and check that out. It's sort of an insider's perspective from someone who had been a targeting manager. It's a little bit different than what we've been talking about today. But let me just close. I'd like to ask each of you for closing thoughts on this. It's a lot to take in. The Commission's report was very comprehensive. There are a lot of details in it in terms of how we get to where we need to be. There are dates set in it. We talked a little bit about metrics today. General Groen, how are you taking all of this information in and then figuring out a way that you can A, keep your head straight at the end of the day, but B, transmit this across the broader DoD?
Yeah, great question, and it's an enormous challenge, but a good one that we welcome, because honestly, it brings visibility to the large scale problem set. And I think having Eric Schmidt and Secretary Work, talk to the department and talk to some of the leadership in Congress really is helpful to kind of inspire action on this front. So I think we'll one of the things was very encouraging to me. We went through the report in some detail when it was released last week, and even with some of the draft reports. And if about half of the recommendations in that final report are really focused on defense, and defense has the lead, within that half, about 2/3 of that we're already working to some degree, right? So it's good, because it's sort of valid, it sort of validates that, yeah, we're on the right track with these things. Now what we're going to do is take each one of those recommendations and really pull the threads. We're going to work with the NSC-AI Commission and the staff to really help us, because we know that they've done some of this, to figure out implementation plans. Is what we're doing in that space adequate, or should we do more, right? And then so that's the ones that we're already working to a degree. There's another big chunk of another large chunk of those recommendations that we've thought through, and we know we have a problem, we know of an issue, we just haven't gotten to it yet. We just haven't gotten to implementation. So we're going to help use that report and use that staff to help us think through, all right, where do we go from here? How, do these break squelch? Do we have to displace something else so that we can do these other things first? And then there's a set of recommendations that really require us to really think hard about, all right, where do we want to go with this, and how do we want to implement? And so we're going to work with the Commission on all of that. One of the great things about AI is, so for example, we got a perfect example. We got a request from Congress to catalog all the AI, capabilities across the department and all the programs that are underway. So the normal defense process would be, you would start pushing out pieces of paper and emails and get everybody's input, and you try to reconcile all this stuff. We actually developed an AI capability to measure that through all of the other data that the department already collects. And so using AI to completely change the way you do a tasker like that, we want to lead by example here. And so that's how we're approaching that task. And I think that's just enormously illuminating and helpful for the whole department to think about all of our processes. We ought to be data driven, all of the things that we do. We just need to take that first step into this space. And when we do, we'll discover, holy cow, this is so much easier. And that'll allow us to move humans up the value chain into, instead of comparing financial spreadsheets, actually doing budgeting and resourcing outlooks and that sort of thing. So moving everybody up the value chain, I think, is a really important thing. Thanks to NSC-AI for putting the report out and really working with us on this. It's going to be a great guide for us as we, again, continue the small little mission of transforming the Department of Defense.
Yeah, Katharina, what's next? I mean, you guys put out this amazing report. You said you're working on implementation, some more guidance. What do we need to achieve next, first and foremost?
Well, I think one of the big things, and though we've been focused on just national defense, we need to understand that the whole of government is needed to react to this as a competitive technology, and that every pillar of our nation, finance, economy, voting, has been under adversarial attack, destabilizing us. And what we need to do as a nation is to galvanize and align towards a non-kinetic war, if you would, a technology competition war. And so what you're going to see is implementations for all of the domains, not just the ones we talked about today, which is the national defense domain. It's going to be the national security domain, and you'll see a lot of venues inside of that, resourcing for organizations like NIST, resourcing for advances in technology space that's not just the defensive world, but the rest of the federal government.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you both. Incredible conversation today. I think super helpful for us here at the Cipher Brief, for all of those hundreds of people we had listening in and joining us and sending questions. Thank you, Director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center at the Department of Defense, Lieutenant General Michael Groen, and AI Commissioner and former Undersecretary of State for Acquisition, Katharina McFarland. Our next session in this important series is Wednesday, April 14th. We're zeroing in on how artificial intelligence is helping to create a more knowledgeable intelligence community. A few of you wrote in with questions about the IC. We're going to get specifically to that next time. So in case you missed it, we had a really unique perspective this week again on that issue. I invite you to go to the cipherbrief.com and kind of pull up some of the content around AI. Thank you again to our sponsor, Microsoft Federal, for their support. And most of all, thank you for being here and for your questions. I hope everyone takes care. We look forward to seeing you next time. We have a big mission ahead of us. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.